Yeah, good morning everyone. So this is group 2 and we are going to talk about public goods and externalities. And I'm Namjosi Blandina who is going to start the presentation. So public goods. What are public goods? Public goods are the materials or services that anyone in a given society can access. We have the pure and impure public goods. So let's talk about the pure and impure public goods. So here we have pure public goods are characterized, first of all, are characterized by non-rival consumption, which means the marginal cost of an additional individual enjoying that good is zero, and also non-excludability, whereby the cost of excluding one individual from enjoying the good is prohibitively high. We have national defense, whereby national defense, as you can see here, national defense is a pure public good. Its marginal cost of use is low and its ease of exclusion is low. Like the ease of excluding someone is really low. That means the cost of excluding that someone is high. Then we have health services. It is easy to charge patients for health services and it costs a doctor twice as much to see two patients as to see one. So the health services are here. This is a pure private good. You can see the marginal cost of use is high and the ease of exclusion is high also. That means the cost of excluding someone is low. Then we have fire protection. Here, individuals who refuse to contribute to the fire department could not be helped in the event of a fire. Only in the rare event where, when two fires break simultaneously, will be a significant cost to extending fire protection to an additional person. So you can see fire protection here. The ease of excluding someone is high. That is like someone, the fire protector can be like, no, I'm not going to help that person because the person didn't pay for what? For fire protection. And yet the marginal cost of use is low. That means like the marginal cost of an additional individual enjoying that person, the good is zero. Like helping someone is really zero. Like stopping the fire, because you know that fire will also affect other people. Then we have in a congested highway, whereby in a congested highway the cost is high in terms of the time lost by drivers using the road. It is costly to exclude by charging for road use. So we have pure and impure public goods. Continuation. Then we talk about the cost of exclusion. There are costs associated with exclusion for private goods as well as for public goods. The costs for public goods are transaction costs. So we have an example whereby the salaries of collectors of tolls along toll highways and at toll bridges are part of the administrative costs associated with operating a price mechanism. Then we also have other types of public goods, whereby we have the local public goods, whereby the benefits of these public goods are enjoyed only locally by only those people living in that particular locality or community. For example, like local police security. Then we have also the global public goods, whereby the benefits of these public goods are enjoyed from anyone in the world, e.g. global environment, global health, and global knowledge, global, those scientific things they find out here. Then we go to the publicly provided private goods, which there is large marginal costs associated with supplying additional individuals, referred to as they are referred to as publicly provided private goods. We have an example of education where if the number of students enrolled doubles, costs will also roughly double. Then, yeah, one of the given explanations for the public provision of education is concerned with distributive considerations, whereby the opportunities of the young should not depend on the wealth of their parents. So here we have a graph. Now we have a graph which is showing distortions associated with supplying goods freely. We have, if a private good is provided freely, there is likely to be overconsumption of that good. Because individuals do not have to pay for the good, therefore they will demand for it since the good is free. They will demand it until the point which the marginal benefit they receive from the good is zero, in spite of the fact that there is a positive marginal cost associated with it. And here in panel A, we can see that for some goods such as water, supplying the good freely rather than at marginal cost result in relatively little additional consumption. Yeah. And we can see the excessive consumption, the shaded part, this is really small in panel A for some goods like water. Then for panel B, for like other goods such as medical services, supplying the good freely rather than at marginal cost results in extensive overconsumption. And you can see it here that it's really big. The excess consumption is really big, this shaded part. Then we have rationing devices for publicly provided private goods. So this graph shows transaction costs, whereby we can see this this line represents constant marginal cost of production. Then we have P star, whereby it says to sell the goods entails transaction costs. Like if you raise the price, then that means you're going to put some transaction costs, which we are saying here. The thing moved from here to here, therefore you can see the transaction costs this space. And therefore, if the government supplies the good freely, it eliminates the transaction costs. If it supplies the good freely, therefore these transaction costs are not going to be there. The ABCD will not be there. Therefore, consumption increases from QE. It will increase from QE to Q0 or Q0. And that means that is a gain, which is area A, B, E. Then if individuals consume the good until the marginal value is zero, expanding consumption from QO to QM, willingness to pay at this point is less than the cost production. This is inefficient. Then to decide if the good should be provided publicly, we must compare the savings in transaction cost plus the gain, which is ABE, and the loss, which is EFQM, and the loss from distortions created by any taxes required to finance the provision of the good publicly. So we have three methods of rationing publicly provided goods. Here, given the inefficiencies arising from overconsumption which we have seen previously, when no charges are imposed for publicly provided private goods, governments often try a way of limiting consumption. This is called the rationing system. And the first method is user charges, whereby prices are imposed. And these prices provide a rationing system. And the advantage of this method is those who benefit bear the cost. You only pay and get. Pay and get. Then disadvantages, it results in underconsumption. People who don't have the money won't pay. Therefore, some resources or some services won't be utilized. Then it also leads to administering pricing system adds transaction costs. Then the second method is the uniform provision, whereby the government supplies the same quantity of the good to everyone. An example is uniform level of free education to all individuals. Even though some individuals would like to have more and some less, you provide equal education. That's like how people, you go to O level and then you're provided with chemistry, physics. Even though you don't want to study the physics, you study it. And then the advantage it has, it saves on transaction costs, whereby there is underconsumption. Remember, underconsumption leads to transaction costs. So if there is free education like uniform education, that means you're going to save on the transaction costs that would have come about would have come with underconsumption of the education when you have prices there. Then the disadvantages, it leads some to underconsume and others to overconsume. High demanders may supplement public consumption in a way that some people may want little and you're giving them more, that you're making them to overconsume. Then some may want more and you're giving them less. That is the meaning of underconsumption. Yeah, so I'll call on my colleague to start from where I've stopped.
Hello, thank you for your time. This is Alison. I'm going to start from the third method of rationing publicly provided goods. So here we're still from the curve. She talked about the uniform provision. So we're going to see here distortions associated with uniform provision. Demand curves for two different individuals. So we have individual who's a high demander, and the other demand curve is for an individual who's a low demander. If goods were privately provided, individual one, the high demander would consume Q1. So you can see the quantity demanded for the high demander is Q2, and for the low demander is Q1. The government chooses to supply each individual with a quantity that is somewhere in between. So the one that the quantity that the government has provided is Q subsequent star. So someone here in the middle. At Q subsequent star, the high demander is consuming less than he or she would like. The high demander's marginal willingness to pay exceeds the marginal cost of production. On the other hand, the low demander is consuming more than the efficient level. His or her marginal willingness to pay is less than the marginal cost, since the low demander does not pay anything at all and still values the good positively he or she consumes up to Q star. As my colleague had talked earlier about, even though you don't want to do sciences, you have to do it. And then those ones who want to do sciences who want to overconsume, but they will not have that opportunity. So on the third one, we are going to talk about queuing. So rather than charging individuals money for access to publicly provided goods and services, the government requires that they pay a cost in waiting time. This allows some adaptability of the level of supply to the needs of individuals. You can see it in medical services. So if you want the doctor, you have to wait in that long queue there to see him when you go to those hospitals. So the advantage, goods are located not necessarily on the basis of who is the wealthiest. Disadvantages, alternative basis of allocation, who has time to spare may be undesirable, time is wasted because those queues are long and you have to take your time there. So the cost you incur is your waiting time. So we're going to talk about efficiency conditions for public goods. A central condition is how large the supply of public goods should be. So remember how group 1 had taken us through Pareto efficiency, where no one can be better off without someone else becoming worse off. The Pareto efficiency in private markets requires that individuals' marginal rate of substitution is equal to the marginal rate of transformation. Now we characterize what is required for Pareto efficiency in the supply of pure public goods. For public goods are those that are efficiently supplied when the sum of marginal rate of substitution over all individuals equals to the marginal rate of transformation. So here we're going to see later a curve explaining that. No, actually we don't not have a curve, but you use a PPF, then you will see a trade-off. Then we continue. Marginal rate of substitution of private goods for public goods tells us how much of the private good each individual is willing to give up to get one more unit of a public good. If you want to get a more unit of a public good, you have to give up 1 unit of a public good. The sum of the marginal rate of substitution tells us how much of the public good all members of society together are willing to give up to get 1 more unit of the public good, which will be consumed jointly by all. So as you're seeing, this is a trade-off, just like a PPA. Marginal rate of transformation tells us how much of the private good must be given up to get one more unit of the public good. So we've used an example of national defense. Assume that when we increase the production of gas by 1, we must reduce the production of butter by 1 pound. So we've gotten 2 individuals, Alison and Blandina. Alison is willing to give up 1/3 of a pound of butter for an extra gun, while Blandina is willing to give up 2/3 of a pound of butter for an extra gun. If you total them up, you equal to 1. 1 is our MRT. So the total amount they would have to give up to get one more gun is 1. But you know what we were considering for the Pareto efficiency, MRS is equals to MRT, where their government has provided an efficient level of national defense. So we're going to talk about pure and impure public goods. A pure public good is a good for which the marginal cost of producing it to an additional person are strictly 0, and for which it is impossible to exclude people from receiving the good, for example, national defense. So in these pure public goods, the cost of exclusion is high. You know, those costs like tolls, every administration cost to exclude a person is really high, and the marginal cost of providing it to an additional person is strictly 0. Like, you are using a road, for another person to use it, it's not like they have to add on an extra road for them. We can all use it. Also with national defense, if a war broke up, they will still protect everyone the same. Many public goods that government provides are not pure public goods because they may not meet one of the properties of non-rivalry or non-exclusion. So we're going to look at demand curves for public goods. So here we have to know some variables. The tax price is the extra payment that an individual has to make for an extra unit of the public good. So assume that an individual pays tax price, which is P, we see there in our equation. That is for each unit of the public good. The individual must pay P, then the total amount of the good total amount the individual can spend, the budget constraint is, so we're going to first look at the individual is this, but then we have to look at other variables. C is the individual's consumption of the private goods, G is the total amount of public goods provided, and Y is the individual's income. The budget constraint shows the combination of private and public goods that individuals can purchase given his or her income or tax price. So we're going to look at the demand curves for public goods. Individuals' demand curves for public goods. So there's panel A and panel B. B seen on panel A is the budget constraint. Its slope is equal to P, the tax price that we saw in the equation earlier. Yeah, and then the indifference curves between public and private goods are also there. Those ones you've seen them, they're marked. We looked at them in our classes, so you know what indifference curves are. Then the individual's highest level of utility is attained at the point of tangency between the indifference curve and the budget constraint. So we can see that on our indifference curve and the budget constraint where they meet, it's the highest level of utility. So the point here. At this point, the slope of the budget constraint and the slope of the indifference curve are identical. So here we look at a situation where we lower the tax price. The budget constraint rotates from BB to BB subsequent to 1. So you can see here how it rotated from there to there. And the individual's most preferred point moves to this one, where we have another indifference curve there. Meet at point E subsequent 1. The individual's demand curve for the public good increases and you can see here the budget guidelines increased. Yeah. So you see here, when you reduce the tax, it means that the demand for public goods has increased. Yes. Thank you for your time. My other colleague is going to come and to take you through the rest of the work.
Thank you so much, my previous colleagues, for what you people did, and I'll be continuing from where you people stopped. I'm Fred Elia, and I'll be taking you through the demand curves for the public goods. The instance here will be for the individual demand curve for public goods. As we can see, my colleague talked of panel A. Me, I'll be starting from panel B. As we can see, by raising and lowering the tax price, we can trace out the demand curve for the public goods. As we can see from point E, this point E, and then E arc from panel A, it shows the quantity of public goods demanded at tax prices P1 and then P2. We could trace more points from point B by shifting the budget constraint further in panel A. We shall also be looking at the next scenario, that is the collective demand for public goods. As we can see, this is given by the vertical summation of individuals' demand curves. We can see that the demand curve can be thought of as a marginal willingness to pay curve. At each level of output, at each level of output of the public good, it says how the individual would be willing to pay for an extra unit of the public good. And this is the vertical sum of the demand curves, which is just the sum of their marginal willingness to pay. This is the total amount that all the individuals, as we can see, together are willing to pay for an extra unit of the public good. Equivalently, the collective demand curve can be seen as the sum of the marginal rates of substitution. Well, the next scenario will be the efficient production of public goods. We shall see the case for the supply curve. For each level of output, the price represents how much of the other goods that must be foregone to produce one more unit of the public goods, which is the marginal rate of transformation. And the next point is, at the output level at which the collective demand is equal to the supply, the sum of the marginal rates of substitution is just equal to the marginal rate of transformation. This is the intersection point, which is the Pareto efficiency. It is Pareto efficient. Why? It is just the intersection. It's the intersection of the supply curve and then the collective demand curve. That's why I'm saying at the output level, where the collective demand is equal to the supply, which gives the sum of marginal rates of substitution, which is just equal to the marginal rate of transformation. I'll again be taking you through the distortionary taxation and the efficient supply of public goods. What do I mean here? The fact that the revenue raised from I mean the fact that the revenue raised to finance public goods is raised through distortionary taxes, such as the income tax. It has some important implications for the efficient supply of public goods. The amount of private goods that individuals must give up to get one more unit of public goods is greater than it would be if the government could raise revenue in a way that did not entail distortionary incentive effects, and that was not costly to administer. So we can see that here it's more of the private coming in to bridge the gap, because when the government also comes in, but hand in hand with the private sector. When they come in, everything will be done in the right path. As we can see from the graph, there is also this scenario for the feasibility curve. What do I mean here? With the feasibility curve, it gives the maximum level of private goods consumption consistent with each level of public goods. That is for the given tax system. As we can see from the graph, this is the whole of this part is the feasibility curve. Then the tax system introduces inefficiencies. So this feasibility curve lies inside the production possibilities shadows. What do I mean? The production possibility shadow or curve. This is just the locus of points which shows the possible combinations of two commodities that can be maximally produced when all the available resources are fully and efficiently utilized. Then, to add on, this is still the distortionary taxation and the efficient supply of public goods. We shall be looking at a case for the marginal economic rate of transformation. What do I mean by this? That the amount of private goods we must give up to obtain one more unit of public goods, but taking into account extra costs. So these are the taxes required to finance increased public expenditure. Then we shall also consider a case for the marginal physical rate of transformation. So it's what we employed in our earlier analysis. This was employed in the earlier analysis, and it's completely determined by technology. That when there is no technology, this can't take place. But when there is technology, then everything will be taking place. I'll be looking at a new condition, which is the marginal rate of transformation, which is equal to the sum of the marginal rates of substitution. Why this? Because it becomes more costly to obtain public goods when taxation imposes distortions. What does this imply? This would imply that the efficient level of public goods will be smaller than it would have been with non-distortionary taxation. Debate about the desirable level of public goods. You see, some believe that the distortions associated with the tax system are not very big, whereas others that the cost of attempting to raise additional revenues for the public goods is great. I'll be taking you through another concept, that is externalities. With externalities, whenever an individual or firm undertakes an action that has an effect on another individual or firm for which the latter doesn't pay or is not paid. This is what we term as externalities. Markets affected by externalities result in inefficient resource allocations. Externalities has got different predefinitions. And here I mean the positive and then the negative externalities. When we talk of the positive externalities, here I mean the actions of an individual or firm that confer or uncompensated benefits to others. Then negative externalities, these are actions that adversely affect others, that what you do will greatly affect the other individual who is not doing it. I'll be explaining this graph which shows the problem of externalities. So we can see that in the absence of externalities, the market equilibrium is QM. As we can see, this is the market equilibrium, which is efficient. And at the intersection of marginal benefit, it equals to the marginal cost. This is the marginal social cost, and this is the marginal benefit. Yeah, as you can see from here. With externalities, the industry supply curve will not reflect marginal social cost, only marginal private costs. What do I mean here? Those borne directly by the producers. The next scenario is if the expansion of steel production increases the level of pollution, the steel industry fails to take into account the cost of pollution. Thus, the marginal social cost curve gives the total extra costs, which is both the private and then the social costs of producing one extra unit of steel. Efficiency requires that marginal social cost equals the marginal benefit from increasing output. Production should occur at QE. That is this QE, which is the efficient level of production is lower than the market equilibrium level. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'll be inviting my other colleague to take part. Thank you.
Nakato Sophia. I'm going to start from where Fred stopped. The problem of externalities. So this graph is showing the common resource problems. Here, as you see, for example, let's say a lake in which the total number of fishes caught increase with the number of fish boats, but less than proportionately. Here, all I can say is so each additional boat decreases the catch of other boats. Externality. As you can see here, we have the average return to a boat, then marginal social return, and here is the market equilibrium, and here is also the what? The market equilibrium. This is the cost of the boat and efficient number of boats, this line. Yeah. Now I'm going to private solutions to externalities. Under some circumstances, private markets can deal with externalities without government assistance. Here we have 3 private solutions. Internalize externalities, assign property rights, and use of legal system. I'll first explain the internalizing externality. Forming economic units of sufficient size, so the most of the consequences of any action occur within the unit. For example, let's say a set of apartments in the same building. Let's say in that same apartment, like the quality of life in the neighborhood is affected by one another, like another household maintaining its property. For example, let's say one neighborhood puts up a plant like flowers. Yeah, this will be a positive externality because it will beautify the place, it will give that good look. And for the negative externality, we can say one neighbor producing a lot of noise, playing a lot of noise in his room. Of course, the neighbors will be affected because they won't get time to concentrate, to rest, so because of the noise being caused by the other neighbor. Yeah. Even when each family owns its own apartment, the household may collectively decide that the maintenance of the facilities that affect them all should be undertaken collectively. Then I'll be going on the Coase theorem. Externalities arise when individuals do not have to pay for full consequences of their actions. Here, all I can say, for example, that example we gave for fishing, like if there are no restrictions on the fishing, like anyone who comes can carry out fishing. Of course, fish is going to get done. So in order to reduce this, there have to be some restrictions or something put of that kind. Another example here are the oil pools. For example, all you need here is to get a large land and drill oil from the ground. So in order to obtain success to the pole, all one needs to do is to buy enough land to drill a well and equipment of drilling. The more oil that one will, the more oil that one well takes out of the pole, the lesser there is for others. Let's say if I have my land and I'm drilling and Blandina comes in also starts drilling and Allison. That means the oil is going to get done. The more one additional person, the more one person comes in, the oil gets done. And so if I drill more, that means others will drill less. So the total extra oil obtained as a result of drilling on extra well is less than the amount obtained by an additional well. Too many wells will be drilled. I guess you guys are getting me. Okay, I'm going to continue. So even when the property rights for a common resources are not assigned to a single individual, the market may find an effective way of dealing with externality. For example, let's say owners of oil wells frequently get together to utilize their production, avoiding that too many wells will be drained. Like let's say a group, they decide to form a group to these people in that group to drill the oil so that they don't allow other people outside to come and drill. So this will help in avoiding the too many wells to be drilled. Yes. I'll go to using the illegal system. Now using the illegal system, sorry for that, I'll go to using the legal system. In the legal system, even when the property rights are not perfectly defined, the legal system can provide protections against externalities. The examples are there, you can go through them. Then I'll go to failures of private remedies for externalities. Here there are several reasons why government intervention is required, as we all know. My first point will be public good problems, in bracket free riders. Many externalities involve the provision of public goods such as clean air, clean water, and so many others. It may be very costly to exclude anyone from enjoying the benefits of these goods. For example, non-smokers get together to compensate smokers for not smoking. Individuals will attempt to be free riders on the efforts of other non-smokers. So here I can say, let's say we have non-smokers and people smoking. Remember, if someone is smoking and another is not smoking, they're affected. Those are negative what? Externalities. So we make a group as non-smokers and we pay those who are smoking to compensate them to stop smoking. But we have free riders who refuse to pay. So those are the people, like that's being a free rider. And some example, as you guys know, when you're doing coursework, some don't want to do coursework but they want marks. That's a free rider. Yes. Okay. I think my part is done. Let me call my colleague to start from where I've stopped. Thank you.
Sorry. I started. My name is Opus Gloria. I'll continue from where my colleague has stopped. Okay, on the failures of private remedies for externalities. The next point was imperfect information problems. How much does the individual need to be compensated for externality? Incentives do not reveal the truth. For example, smokers will try to persuade non-smokers that they require a lot of compensation to induce them not to smoke. Then the next point is transaction costs. Costs of getting individuals together to internalize externalities voluntarily are significant. Transaction costs are a major disadvantage of dealing with externality through judicial processes. For many externalities, these losses involved may simply be too small to justify undertaking litigation. Additional problems with litigation. Uncertainty about outcomes. If litigation costs are large, the uncertainty acts as a further deterrent to individuals contemplating using the court. Contemplating using the court system to deal with externalities. Differential access. High litigation costs are uncertain outcome of the litigation process imply that there is different access to legal remedies. Poor people may not be able or willing to bear the risks of litigation. Public sector solutions to externalities. Public sector solutions to environmental externalities fall into two broad categories. Market-based solutions. These attempt to influence incentives to ensure economically efficient outcomes. For example, fines for polluting can be used to present firms with the true social cost of their actions, therefore diminishing their incentive to pollute. Direct regulation. It is by the government to limit externalities. For example, mandatory emission standards for automobiles. Market-based solutions. They take three forms: fines and taxes, subsidies for pollution abatement, marketable permits. Fines and taxes. The simplest form of market-based solution involves levying fees in proportion of the pollution emitted. Whenever there is an externality, there is a difference between social costs and the private costs, and between the social benefit and the private benefit. A properly calculated fine or tax presents the individual or firm with the true social costs and benefits of their actions. Fines of this sort designed to make marginal private costs equal to marginal social costs and the marginal private benefits equal to the marginal social benefits, are called corrective taxes or Pigovian taxes. For example, steel producers polluting the air. Because firms are concerned with marginal private costs, not the marginal social costs, the output of steel would be excessive by charging each firm an amount equal to the marginal cost of pollution. The margin private costs and marginal social costs are equated. Here is a graph showing fines and taxes. Market equilibrium with and without fines. We assume that the amount of pollution is proportional to the level of output and the marginal cost of each unit of pollution is fixed. By imposing a fixed charge per unit of output equal to the marginal cost of pollution, each firm will be induced to produce the socially efficient level of output. Distance EA shows the tax per unit, and area EABC shows the total pollution taxes paid. Firms can reduce pollution by producing less or by changing production methods. Changes in production methods entail direct expenditures for pollution control devices or changes in the input mixes and other alterations in the production process. Efficient control of pollution. Fines related directly to the amount of pollution ensure that firms will undertake the pollution abatement in the most efficient manner. Assume that there is a fixed marginal social cost imposed on others by each unit of pollution. It is costly to reduce pollution, and we will assume that at any given level of production, it costs more to reduce pollution more. In other words, the marginal cost of pollution abatement is rising. Efficiency requires that the marginal social benefits of pollution abatement equals to the marginal social cost of pollution abatement. That's point B star. If the firm is charged a fine F star equal to the marginal social cost of pollution, the firm will undertake the efficient level of expenditure on pollution abatement. Let me call upon my other colleague to take you through the presentation.
I'm Phoebe Ainembabazi. I'm going to start from where my colleagues stopped. I'm going to talk about subsidizing pollution abatement. Rather than taxing pollution, the government could subsidize pollution abatement expenditures. So this graph is talking about pollution abatement subsidies. Government subsidizes the purchase of pollution abatement equipment. Difference between marginal social benefit of pollution abatement and marginal private benefit of pollution abatement. As pollution decreases, the marginal social benefit from further pollution abatement, it decreases. Assume that the marginal costs of pollution abatement are constant. This remedy does not attain a social efficient resource allocation. The total marginal social costs of producing steel include the cost of government subsidies for pollution abatement. Firms fail to take this into account in deciding the level of production. The marginal social cost of steel production exceeds the marginal private cost. So the next graph, it is talking about the market equilibrium with pollution abatement subsidies. You see, the pollution abatement subsidy reduces the marginal social cost of output, which is from the dashed line, which is solid black. But it also reduces the marginal private costs. So QS and QE, there is still an excessive level of production of steel. When we see Q, so at QM is greater than QE, output it is before subsidy. So a well-designed subsidy lowers the total marginal social cost of production. So we see there is less pollution. The optimal level of output with a subsidy Q0 is greater than the optimal level of output with farms have no incentives to reduce pollution at point QE. Polluters prefer subsidies over fines for pollution abatement. Profits are higher under the former system than the latter under the pollution abatement subsidy scheme. Producers do not face the true social cost of their production. There is an inefficiency. By contrast, with an appropriate design system of fines, producers do face the true social cost. So when we look at the marketable permits, the market-based solution that involves tradable permits which operate under a cap and a trade system. A limit or a cap is placed on the total amount of pollutant that may be emitted, and the limit is either allocated or sold to farms in the form of emission permits. This limits the amount of pollution that any single farm may emit. For example, each farm may be allowed to emit 90% of the amount emitted of previous years. Because the government cares about the total amount of emission reduction, it allows farms to trade permits. A company that cuts its emissions in half could sell some of its permits to another company that wants to expand production, and hence it increases the emission of pollutants. Under this system, farms will be willing to sell permits when price of permit is greater than marginal cost of reducing pollution. Farms will be willing to buy permits when marginal cost of reducing pollution is greater than market price of permit. In equilibrium, each farm will reduce pollution to a level such that marginal cost of reducing pollution is equal to market price of permit. As on fines, marketable permits use the market mechanism to ensure economic efficiency in the reduction of pollution. In the absence of uncertainty about the cost of carbon emission on how consumers and fines will respond to any price of emission imposed, the two systems are equivalent, setting a price for those emissions. It leads to particular quantity, and setting a quantity leads to the corresponding price. Government has traditionally, under the regulations, we see government has traditionally relied on direct regulations for curbing environmental externalities. It sets emissions standards for automobiles. It put forth detailed regulations relating the disposal of toxic chemicals. It outlawed smoking on airline flights. It imposed law requiring oil companies with wells in the same oil pools to unitize their production. It imposed restrictions on fishing and hunting to reduce the insufficiencies associated with excessive utilization of these common resources. Advocates of regulation argue that they provide greater certainty. If farms are prohibited from emitting more than a given level of pollution into water, then one knows the maximum level of pollution. You see, there are two important classes of regulations. One is performance-based regulations. We see the government only cares about the final outcomes, how much pollution is produced. regulations on automobile emissions. The second one is input regulations, how much of pollution regulation has focused on practices and inputs. So the government may prohibit the use of certain grades of coal when feasible. It is preferable to focus on performance. The one argument for focusing on input and practices is that they may be easily monitored. One of the reasons under the innovation, we have one of the reasons for performance-based regulations, as opposed to input standards and pollution-based taxes, we see as opposed to subsidies for particular forms of abatement equipment, is that they directly address what is of concern, which is the level of pollution, and they may induce innovations such as new ways of producing that generate less pollution, of new technique of abating pollution at a lower cost. There has been considerably controversy over the best way of stimulate innovation and about the scope innovation. Environmentalists are less convinced that economists, the power of normal economic forces, may believe that industry must be forced to innovate. Take an example of imposing extremely stringent standards. The success of this strategy has been mixed. In some cases, rather than inducing innovation, stringent regulations have induced litigation. It may appear cheaper for a firm to try to persuade a court that the regulation is unreasonable than to spend money to meet the standard imposed by regulations.